What is going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in again. It's Our Stories, Your Legacy. We're back with another episode. This is Real Talk. And here we are with another fire round episode, just kind of talking about whatever is inspiring us that week, that day, or whatever we've been inspired to discuss that just kind of came into our mind. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about technology and media in general, right? Since the turn of technology and the advancement of personal computer devices powered with the internet, like literally at our fingertips, consumption of the media has been growing a part of our lifestyle, even more so today while we're in this pandemic. I mean, no longer do we have to venture out to theaters, grocery stores, restaurants to experience them. We have apps now that can just get us our groceries and get us our food, right? Also, I mean, this is kind of new to me, but I mean, since the pandemic, video streaming services are allowing us to stream new movies at the same time that they're being released in theaters. More than ever, we don't have to leave the comfort of our homes, and that kind of had a lot to do with the lockdowns and the government orders to stay at home because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this episode, we're going to quickly explore if the pandemic has caused us to be more consumers of media than before. And I use the term media very lightly, so that could be social media, that could be video streaming services, music streaming services, anything that you consider media is kind of like up in the air. Or on the flip side, maybe it has caused us to consume less. So as always, before we begin, we're going to do a quick check-in around the room and see who is all here today for today's episode. And so it is just us two again, myself and my brother Tyler. Tyler, how's your day going so far?
Going well so far. It's a hot one today. So
Yeah.
I think it hit 89. So it was pretty warm, and then the week to come, it's supposed to hit 97 midweek or something. So, for us up here in Washington, that's kind of like our hot week, and I'm sure we'll have some more hot ones during out the summer and whatnot. But yeah, no, definitely hot today. Yeah, I will say when I first went out and when it was 84, it wasn't too bad. But I think as it started climbing, and because I was outside more and longer, it started to kind of get a little toasty. But yeah, no, I mean, other than that, it's been good. I think my allergies kind of kicked up today, a little bit yesterday too. I think it's because everything is so dry right now. Like, because typically, they haven't been too bad with allergy medicine and whatnot. But
Yeah.
I think because it's so dry right now for us that everything is just flying up into the air, regardless of
Right.
what it is. So dirt, pollen, grass that's dead that's just flying up
Right.
in the air. So like all that stuff is like in the air. So been getting hit with a little bit of allergy stuff, but other than that, man, can't complain. It's nice weather
Yeah.
outside. It's starting to get lighter. Summer solstice was yesterday, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Happy summer solstice. Yeah. Yeah. And no, my day's been pretty good so far too. Pretty chill. But however, yeah, my allergies act up the worst yesterday. That was when had a sore throat. I felt like I was having a cold coming on. It was the weirdest thing. Even
Yeah.
without medicine, it just felt, really, really bad. But yeah, a lot better today, a lot chill, definitely a lot hotter in the house, but we're definitely moving on.
For sure.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Let's get this rolling.
Cool.
So let's get into it. Kind of like I mentioned before in the intro, um, this is kind of a conversation about we're still in the pandemic. So, as a lot of our listeners know, we started this series because of the pandemic, and then just kind of had many different um, discussions and episodes that were related to our lives and how we were living through it through our own eyes via being in the pandemic. And so, with vaccines, percent people getting vaccinated at a higher percent, things are starting to open and things are starting to travel. Kids are out of school now, or about to be out of school. especially here in the Pacific Northwest. So is yet to see if things are gonna just be okay. People are gonna stay vaccinated and whatnot. Um, so we're still, so we're still continuing that. We're still technically in pandemic until everything is still widely opened up and no more fear mongering. Sorry, I used lack of a better term, but the fear subside with the public kind of um, for example, when we're talking about the pandemic, it's really a lot about government regulations. And so, when the government finally eased restrictions is when we can truly see where the future is headed. So while that's the case, we're all continuing to support one another, stay empathetic, stay kind, stay safe, and, continuing with our episodes. And so technology during the pandemic, with the internet literally at our fingertips, or in our face from the screen time we get. So I'm gonna start, well, obviously just you, Tyler. So I'm gonna start this question for both of us. How did the pandemic impact your views on technology so far, specifically media and media consumption, however you define media? For instance, has it caused you to be more of a homebody? With kind of like what I mentioned with the benefits of apps now these days, or has the pandemic made you kind of become turned off by media and by technology?
I think for me, I don't know. I feel like the world was already kind of moving in that direction, anyways. Um, I think the pandemic was more of a catalyst for where we are today with things like that. And I know people, were saying things like during the pandemic, obviously when stores were starting to open back up or whatever that they, a lot of stores implemented like drive up kind of things. But some stores already had drive up things prior to the pandemic. So like, Target was one of the ones that I used all the time. I used it pre-pandemic, where I would just order things and then, drive to the store, say I'm here, and they bring it out to my car. Just a quick, easy. I don't have to go in there. I'm not tempted to buy things that I don't need. So it was just a very convenient thing. And once the pandemic hit, you obviously saw a lot more stores kind of move to that method of shopping. And I think it's a good thing for a lot of people. It's a lot of convenience. You don't have to go into a crowded store. You can just shop at your convenience on your phone, on your computer, and then go and pick things up and just, plain and simple. And it was one of those things. Like, I think a lot of people thought that was only with like, almost like a delivery service, kind of like Uber Eats, or blanking on the other ones, but Instacart, that kind of stuff. Like if you had groceries or anything, you could do Instacart, which was a pre-pandemic thing. So I think those were kind of the start of all of this, to where now you have to pick up at the store kind of option kind of thing, and drive up and all that. I know I've used it plenty of times during the pandemic, even prior to the pandemic. So it's one of those things. I think that the world was eventually going to get there anyways, but I do think the pandemic sped it up. I think, when it was the whole stay in place for 2 weeks to slow the spread, people started like, you're like, oh, we can't really go out. The only places that are open right now are, grocery stores. So it's like, okay, well, now I don't want to go to the grocery store because it's crazy. Everything is running on low supply, all of that. So then a lot of places implemented more and more of the, order and pick it up kind of thing. So you didn't have to deal with that. But as we moved on, and obviously this is, we're on episode 51 of the Rona series at this point. So you already know that this pandemic has lasted 15 months. When it started, it was, 2 weeks, stay in place. We'll help slow the spread. And now we're 15 months into this thing, hopefully nearing the end-ish of it. I think this is end game part one. If we're looking at the pandemic as a whole, I think there might be a little jump uh, into summer, toward the fall when, new strands and all that stuff and flu season comes back, you might see a little spike. But for right now, it's kind of like the beginning of Endgame Part One kind of thing for it. So, as we progressed through that first 2 weeks, and then we realized, like, oh, we're not going to be able to go outside. Oh, everything is still happening. Oh, this, and this. We all got accustomed to, unless you had uh, you know, a job that was completely necessary for you to actually go to, frontline workers and grocery stores and all that stuff, you were pretty much stuck at home. And the only thing that you could do was get into media. You know what I'm saying? Um, for me in particular, I usually read. I say read, but I usually read the news. When I went into work, all that stuff, I would take a little bit of time in the morning when I got in, got my coffee, got settled, read a little bit of news. I do the same thing at lunch, just kind of keep up on my media and what's going on in the world, kind of thing. Um, I think after being in the pandemic for a month, I stopped doing that, honestly, because I pretty much knew what was going to be on the news. And typically, most things on the news, if you watch the news, even if you read it and whatnot, most of the stuff is negative. You watch the evening news or, the morning news or whatever. 80% of the stuff is negative stuff that's happening in the world or in your county or city or whatever. With the 15%, nice, like, oh, there's sports. Oh, there's weather. Everything else kind of a little bit negative, but that's just what it is. So for me, with the pandemic being like a month in, then I'm like, you just kept hearing worse stories and just things that kept happening that made it even worse and worse, and people dying and whole countries getting shut down. And, it's almost like that fear thing. So I just stopped reading the news in general. Like if I saw something, I was like, kind of just tuned it out, honestly, because I was like, well, obviously the only news I really turned into on was our governor who, hopped on every 2 weeks to give an update. But other than that, I kind of tried to avoid the news as much as I could, just because of everything that was happening. Because obviously, we had a pandemic. We also had a very interesting president in the office at that point, with the presidential elections coming up and all that stuff during that time. So it was just one of those things. There was a lot of stuff that I tried to avoid just because I was like, I don't know, just like so much negativity, really. But obviously, we had social justice movements and everything like that, which kept things in perspective. Like that stuff is still happening. So yeah, I kind of went away from mostly mainstream media, news, that kind of stuff. I wasn't on social media as much. I wasn't really ingrained into media as much as I thought I was, or as I was when I was at work. Um, as far as like consuming media, when we're talking Netflix, Disney Plus, those kind of things, a lot of that happened just because there wasn't anything else to do. Video games, that kind of stuff. That all, if you've listened into our entire series of 51 episodes for the pandemic specifically, you'll see you'll see the trend. Like, how are we staying sane? Like, what are we doing? We went back to video games. What are we doing without sports? What are we watching on Netflix? What good show recommendations are out there? Just because we were so consumed in those things, because we literally couldn't do anything else. We couldn't go outside or anything like that. Um, that we were just like ingrained in it. It was just all part of life. I think my first 3 weeks of being at home, working from home, and having like very little work to actually do and accomplish. You send an email off in the morning and wait for a response, and you don't get one for 5 hours, and you're just kind of sitting there twiddling your thumbs. That was kind of difficult, but there was a lot of uh, almost binge watching type of stuff happening. Just like put a show on in the background. I went through whatever 14 seasons of like NCIS, and those episodes are like 48 minutes long each. So we just kind of powered through like shows and stuff that kind of kept the day going. We can sit there and talk to one another for 8 hours during our workday, but it's just one of those things. Like that, another thing too. It's like we got so comfortable and so used to being with our person or whoever we lived with, our family, that we almost took that for granted a little bit in the beginning. And again, in other past episodes, we'll talk about that as well, to where making time and how to keep your relationship or your family relationship, that dynamic, very like important, and having it as a focal point still. We've got to a point to where we just took it for granted, in sense of like, oh, instead of waking up, going to work, coming home, seeing your partner or your family, 4 or 5 hours before you go to bed or whatever, out of a 24-hour day you might see them 4 or 5 hours, but then it kind of got flipped to where you see them literally 24/7, and you're just like, oh well, I wouldn't have to do anything special because I see you all the time now. It's just one of those things. So um, to the point of getting so engrossed into media, that's what happened. We spent so much time together that it was like, oh, we don't have to talk to each other all the time. We can just watch TV or play video games or do whatever it was that was within the media realm of things, as we're talking about here.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head for a lot of the stuff that I do. The binge watching part is the funniest part for me because I totally relate to that. Um, we have gone through so many shows during the pandemic, and but it's not like actively watching it. Sometimes it's just like having it in the background while we're working or while we are doing chores around the house. But we just start experiencing new and newer shows. But one thing I wanted to dive into was kind of the touch on another topic was, social media in general, whether it's the news outlet or the evening news, all that stuff. There's a lot of negativity, and so one thing that I can add on to what you're saying is just kind of I started realizing I needed to cut some things, for peace of mind. Whether out of sight, out of mind was the idea, made me feel a little more peaceful mentally. Cutting social media apps that I no longer need or no longer benefits me, you know, and finding and kind of like weeding out the saturation of all these news and finding like what is better media to consume that not only one can help me stay informed of the world around us, but in a good way, and also what will give me peace of mind, mentally. Because one thing I've learned with consuming media throughout the pandemic was, we had a lot of negativity going on, a lot of things going on that was kind of putting things in perspective, like you said, or just all this stuff that was just kind of putting us in a bad place. On top of being stuck at home in the pandemic and worrying about our friends and our family and our coworkers, it was one of those things where it's like, man, this is stressing me out. So what media has taught me during the pandemic is to kind of weed out stuff that is not good for you, cut out things that are not good for you, cut out the fat that's not good for you. And so it's one of those things where I think going forward, I learned to not really rely on like social media or the evening news or things that is going to weigh on me, negatively. However, video streaming services, I'm starting to love it. There's so many things that we could watch, so many entertainment that we could just watch from our fingertips now, without even having to go to the theater anymore or to a sporting event or to any event. Most stuff is like streamed live, and it probably will never replace certain things, but I kind of love all these services that are coming up, all these delivery services, for food, for groceries. So it's one of those things that I, you're right. The pandemic kind of accelerated these apps and these services, but the world is already headed towards it. And I'm not gonna lie, if it wasn't for the pandemic, I wouldn't have appreciate these services, these gig services, right? The only gig service I appreciated was like Uber and Lyft, right? If you're traveling, instead of calling a taxi or hopping on a public transportation system that you don't want to share with other people or with other strangers, hop on one of those. But because of the pandemic, it introduced me to all these cool stuff. Uber Eats. The other one you're talking about that I use the most is DoorDash. Stuff like that. Grubhub, whatever. And so it's cool. And it's something I'm excited to continue to see growth more in the future. And I think the pandemic taught me as social media or just media in general grows and we start to consume more, I start to learn now, okay, what is not going to benefit me and cut those out. Yeah, man. Pretty straightforward. I think is one of those things where, it's one of those things where it's all per each user. And, everyone uses the media differently. Everyone uses technology differently. So, we'll all have different answers for it and what we learn from using it during the pandemic. Any final words?
I don't think I have anything final to really add to that. I think you nailed it on the closing there, as far as like what each person did during the pandemic. Honestly, it was just kind of one of those things that you know people just ended up getting to a point to where, like, okay, I am realizing that I don't actually need this as much as I thought I did, kind of thing. It was a very good reset in more ways than one. But I know people are also itching to kind of really just dive back into ways of old. But I think with some of the habits that people developed during the pandemic, maybe they can cut down, be a little bit more minimal on certain things. So, you know, I feel like most of us learned how to be minimal in those situations and like kind of moving forward. Um, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes and what this summer holds and what the next year holds.
For sure, man. Thank you for that. Thank you for today's episode, and we thank our listeners again. Thank you for time to wrap it up. As always, we appreciate our listeners, viewers too, who are watching us. Thank you for joining us and listening to another episode. As always, to the rest of the night, we challenge our listeners: start that mental exercise, marinate over it, see how it applies to your own life. Ask yourself this question. For I would say 90% of us in the world, maybe give or take, use technology for any part of our lives. So, have this discussion with yourself and figure out where you fall in the spectrum of what you learn about technology and media throughout the pandemic. So, run it by your friends and family. Summer's coming up. Create a safe bonfire, please, because for most places in the world, wildfires are much more prominent than before. Create a safe bonfire and just, sip some good brews, have some good food, learn from one another. But most importantly, always keep the dialogue going, just like we always say every episode. That's how we learn and grow. And that's how, Tyler and I and our team will continue to keep working on us, continue to improve every week. And so, we're not where we want to be, but it's consistency, keep grinding at it and tweaking, the bad parts and try to make it better each and every time. So as always, we appreciate the listen. This is our stories, your legacy. Have a good night. We'll see y'all next week, and we're out.
Later.